What happens when a world-famous actor walks into what's supposed to be a friendly TV interview and walks straight into an ambush? What happens when calm professionalism collides with personal agendas and a polite conversation turns into a public showdown? Today, we're unpacking one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television. A moment where Ryan Gosling, an actor celebrated for his composure and introspection, found himself pushed into an unexpected verbal crossfire. A segment that began as routine would spiral into tension, raised voices, and a behind-the-scenes intervention no one saw coming. But before we break it all down, take a second to subscribe and let me know in the comments. Do you think talk show hosts should challenge their guests this aggressively? Or is there a line that should never be crossed? Now, let's rewind and look at how this all started. The day began quietly inside the View Studios in New York City. Ryan Gosling arrived early, just as he always does, prepared for what his team described as a straightforward promotional appearance for his newest film. Nothing controversial. Nothing confrontational. Just another stop on a busy press tour. Behind the scenes, Gosling was exactly who people expected him to be. Respectful, relaxed, and attentive. Members of the makeup crew later shared how surprised they were that he remembered them from past visits, greeting them by name and asking how they'd been. It was the kind of professionalism that instantly set a positive tone. But while Gosling was calmly reviewing his notes in the green room, the atmosphere elsewhere told a very different story. According to several staff members, Joy Behar had spent her morning scrolling through social media, growing increasingly irritated over Gosling's recent remarks about keeping his distance from political discourse. One crew member would later describe her mood as wound tight, long before the cameras ever rolled. And that's where things began to quietly shift. When the show went live, no one watching at home would have suspected what was brewing beneath the surface. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed Gosling with her usual warmth, and the studio erupted into applause as he walked out, flashing that familiar, understated smile and waving to the audience. "Ryan Gosling, everyone," Whoopi announced, her enthusiasm genuine. "Thanks for being here." "Thanks for having me," Gosling replied as he took his seat. "It's always good to be back." The conversation started smoothly. Sarah Haynes kicked things off with a light question about his latest role, giving Gosling space to talk about his craft, something he's always been known to do thoughtfully. Rather than rushing through a rehearsed answer, he slowed down, choosing his words carefully. "This character really pushed me," he explained. "When you're portraying someone dealing with deep internal struggles, you can't fake it. You have to dig into something real, something honest." The audience leaned in. The panel nodded along. This was classic Gosling, reflective, sincere, and grounded. Everything felt natural, comfortable, almost too perfect. Then Joy Behar spoke. "Ryan," she began, and instantly the energy in the room changed. Her tone was sharper, more pointed. "I want to ask you about your recent comments on avoiding politics. Don't you think that's a privilege, considering your level of influence?" Gosling's smile didn't disappear, but his posture shifted ever so slightly. He sat up straighter, more alert. "Well, Joy," he responded calmly, "I think everyone should have the freedom to decide how they use their platform. For me, I prefer to let my work speak." But Behar wasn't satisfied. Isn't that just another way of saying you don't care? She pressed, her voice tightening. When you have millions of followers, isn't staying quiet actually taking a stance? The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. This clearly wasn't where the interview was meant to go. The tension crept across the table, thick enough to feel. Still, Gosling didn't raise his voice. I don't see it that way, he replied evenly. Caring about issues and feeling obligated to publicly debate politics aren't the same thing. I vote. I support causes I believe in. I just don't think every actor needs to become a political spokesperson. For a brief moment, it seemed like that might be the end of it. But then Bahar leaned forward. So you're saying actors shouldn't use their influence to educate people on important issues? She shot back, her tone now openly confrontational. And that's when the conversation crossed a line, setting the stage for a clash no one in that studio was prepared for. That sounds incredibly selfish. A ripple of murmurs rolled through the audience. This was no longer the light-hearted celebrity conversation they had tuned in for. The air inside the studio tightened, heavy with discomfort, as everyone sensed the situation slipping out of control. I'm saying, Gosling replied, and for the first time, there was a noticeable edge beneath his calm. That maybe we should trust people to think for themselves, instead of assuming they need celebrities to tell them how to vote. Bahar's face flushed instantly. Oh, so now you're accusing us of telling people how to vote, she fired back. Is that what you think this show does? Whoopi tried to step in, her voice measured. Maybe we should bring it back to the movie. But Bahar cut her off. No, Whoopi. I want to hear this. Ryan thinks we're just a group of celebrities pushing opinions. Is that right, Ryan? Gosling met her gaze directly. His voice stayed steady, but it carried new weight. Joy, you're putting words in my mouth. I never said anything about this show. I was talking about my own personal choices. Your choices, Bahar repeated with a mocking edge. Your choice to stay comfortable, to protect your precious career instead of taking a stand on anything that actually matters. And that's when the shift happened. The polite smile disappeared completely. Gosling leaned back in his chair, studying Bahar with a calm intensity that immediately commanded the room. Joy, he said quietly, do you actually want to talk about my movie? Or did you invite me here just to attack me? The question landed like a thunderclap. The panel froze. The audience fell into stunned silence. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. In that moment, it was clear. Joy Behar had pushed one of Hollywood's most composed actors to his limit. And now, everyone was waiting to see what he'd do next. Bahar's eyes flashed. Instead of backing down, she lunged forward verbally. Attack you? She scoffed, her voice rising. Oh, please. Poor Ryan Gosling can't handle a few tough questions. Maybe you should stick to romantic movies if real conversations are too much for you. The insult hit hard. Audible gasps echoed through the audience. Sarah Haynes looked stunned, her mouth slightly open. The line of professionalism had been obliterated. Gosling sat motionless for a beat. Then he slowly nodded. There it is, he said calmly, his voice low but commanding. I came here to talk about a film that explores mental health, family trauma, and finding hope in dark places, issues that affect real people every day. But instead, You're turning this into a political ambush. I'm asking legitimate questions, Bihar snapped. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Legitimate questions, Gosling repeated, raising an eyebrow. You just insulted my entire career and called me selfish for not aligning with your political expectations. In what world is that journalism? Whoopi leaned in again, trying desperately to regain control. Okay, let's pause for a moment. No, Bahar interrupted loudly. I'm tired of Hollywood pretty boys coming on this show, smiling their way through, refusing to take real positions on important issues. Ryan thinks he's above getting his hands dirty. Gosling leaned forward now, his composure cracking for the first time. Too good, he said firmly. I never said I was above anything. I said I keep my political views private. There's a difference between having principles and performing them for cameras. Performing? Bahar's voice went shrill. So now you're saying people who speak out against injustice are just performing? I think, Gosling replied, lowering his voice to just above a whisper, yet somehow filling the room, that some people confuse being loud with being right. The studio went completely silent. Crew members froze mid-step. No one breathed. Bahar's face darkened. Excuse me? She said, standing abruptly. Did you just call me loud? Gosling didn't move. I said some people confuse volume with correctness. If that feels personal, that's between you and your conscience. My conscience, Bihar shouted. My conscience is just fine. I sleep well knowing I use my platform to fight for people without a voice. And I respect that, Gosling replied evenly. But respect works both ways. Joy? Gosling said steadily. You can fight for what you believe in without attacking people who choose to fight for their causes in a different way. That was the moment everything exploded. Behar slammed her hand down on the table, the sharp sound making the entire panel jump. Different? She snapped. Different is one thing. Cowardice is another. And that word changed everything. For the first time since the interview began, Ryan Gosling's legendary composure cracked. He rose slowly from his chair, his expression hardening into something the hosts and the audience had never seen before. Cowardice, he repeated quietly, his voice low and dangerous. You want to talk about cowardice? Let's talk about it. The room felt frozen. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work, he continued, his words sharp and controlled, and instead ambushed me with political attacks because you disagree with my personal choices. You've insulted my character, my career, and now my integrity. And you call that brave? No one spoke. One host stared down at the table. Another looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. This had crossed so far beyond a normal interview that no one knew how to intervene. I'm holding you accountable, Behar shot back. But for the first time, her voice wavered. Accountable for what? Gosling demanded. For refusing to turn every interview into a political rally, he continued, answering for her. For believing that maybe people can watch a movie without needing to know exactly how the lead actor votes. For thinking art can exist without becoming a campaign speech. Behar tried to respond, but the fire in her voice was fading. You're using your privilege to stay comfortable, while the rest of us do the hard work, she said. But even she seemed to realize how far this had gone. Gosling shook his head slowly. "You don't know anything about my life beyond headlines and social media clips. You don't know the causes I support privately, the conversations I have with my family, or what I teach my kids about integrity and compassion." He stepped closer to the table. "You decided that because I don't perform my politics for an audience, I must not have any principles at all. That's not what Bahar started. But Gosling wasn't finished. "And you know what the saddest part is?" he said, his voice growing stronger. "We probably agree on more than you think. But instead of having a real conversation, instead of trying to understand why someone might take a different approach, you decided to make me your enemy." The control room was in chaos. Camera operators glanced at one another, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away. This was television history unfolding in real time, and no one was steering the ship anymore. "You turned what could have been meaningful into an attempt at public humiliation," Gosling finished. Behar finally realized she had lost the room. The audience, once restless, was now openly uncomfortable. Even her fellow hosts leaned away, their body language screaming distance. "I was just trying to," she began weakly. "No," Gosling cut in. "You were trying to score points. You wanted to look tough and principled by tearing down someone who wasn't even fighting back." He paused. "Until now." Gosling walked toward the edge of the set, then turned back one last time. "You want to talk about using platforms responsibly?" he said calmly. "Start by using yours to build people up instead of tearing them down. Try conversations instead of interrogations. And maybe remember that the people sitting across from you are human beings, not political props." Behar's face twisted, a mix of anger and something dangerously close to shame. "You can't talk to me like that," she said, but the conviction was gone. "Actually," Gosling replied evenly, "I think I just did." The silence that followed was suffocating. No applause, no murmurs, just shock. Then Bahar snapped. She turned toward the wings of the set, her voice cracking with rage. "Get him out of here! Security! Get him off my stage!" Gosling stood perfectly calm now, looking at her with unmistakable pity. "Your stage?" he said quietly. "This isn't your stage. This is supposed to be a place for conversation, not whatever this just was." "I said, get him out!" Behar screamed, desperation spilling into her voice. She had completely lost control, and everyone could see it. Whoopi finally tried to intervene. "Joy, maybe we should take a commercial." "No," Behar snapped, spinning on her co-host. "This is the problem. Everyone wants to smooth things over instead of calling out bad behavior." Gosling let out a short, bitter laugh. "Bad behavior," he repeated softly. "Joy, take a look around." Gosling's voice was steady, but it carried undeniable authority. "Look at your co-hosts. Look at the audience. Look at the crew. Everyone in this room knows who crossed the line today, and it wasn't me." And he was right. Sarah Haynes blinked back tears, the second-hand embarrassment written all over her face. Sunny Hostin stared down at her hands, as if willing herself to disappear. Audience members shifted uneasily in their seats, some visibly shaken by what they'd just witnessed. Even the normally unflappable camera operators looked rattled, their movements slower, unsure. But Joy Behar was too deep in it to notice any of that. "You think you can come on my show and lecture me about how to do my job?" she snarled. "You think these little speeches make you some kind of hero?" "I think," Gosling replied with devastating calm, "that someone needed to tell you the truth about how you've been treating people. And clearly, no one else here has been willing to do it." That landed. You could see it in the way the other hosts flinched, in the subtle nods from crew members who had seen this kind of moment before. This wasn't new behavior. It was just the first time someone had refused to absorb it quietly. Security finally approached the set, moving cautiously, unsure of how they'd ended up in the middle of a live television implosion. One guard stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave," he said, almost apologetically. Gosling nodded without hesitation. "Of course. I understand. You're just doing your job." He turned back to the table one last time. "Whoopi, Sarah, Sunny, Alyssa, it was good to see you all again. I'm sorry this didn't go differently." Then he faced Joy directly, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio. "Joy, I hope someday you learn the difference between being passionate about your beliefs and being cruel to people who don't express them the same way you do. You can fight for what you believe in without becoming the very thing you claim to be fighting against." Joy opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, there was no comeback, no punchline, no deflection. You can't just," she stammered. "I can't." "What, Joy?" Gosling asked calmly. "Tell the truth? Admit that you spent the last 20 minutes trying to humiliate a guest for daring to disagree with you? Acknowledge that you turned a professional interview into a personal attack." He began walking toward the exit, then paused, speaking without turning around. "You know what's really sad? We could have had a real conversation about celebrity, influence, and politics. We could have shared perspectives, maybe even learned something from each other. Instead, you made it about power, about dominance, about who could hurt who the most." He turned back one final time, genuine sadness in his voice. "I feel sorry for you, Joy. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that the people sitting across from you are human beings, not targets for your anger." And with that, Ryan Gosling walked off the set, flanked by security guards who looked like they wanted to vanish into thin air. The silence he left behind was crushing. Whoopi tried desperately to salvage the show. "Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with—" Her voice trembled, the strain impossible to hide. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. This was a live, public meltdown. As the cameras finally cut to commercial, Behar's voice could still be heard, no longer confident or combative, but small and defensive. "He had no right to talk to me like that. This is my show. I have every right to ask hard questions." But the damage was already done. The hosts sat in silence. The audience remained uneasy. Crew members shook their heads as they moved through their routines. Everyone knew what had just happened, and there was no editing it away. Ryan Gosling walked onto that stage as a guest promoting a movie. He walked off as something else entirely. Someone who finally said what many in Hollywood had thought, but were too polite, too cautious, or too afraid to say out loud. Joy Behar sat at the desk, surrounded by co-hosts who couldn't meet her eyes, facing an audience that had just seen exactly how she responded when someone refused to be intimidated. And as the show limped toward its end, one question echoed louder than anything else. Who was really removed from that stage? The guest who kept his dignity while speaking truth to power? Or the host who lost control so completely she needed security to silence him? What do you think? Was Ryan Gosling right to finally push back? Or should guests always smile and endure whatever comes their way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where Hollywood's biggest names reveal who they truly are when the cameras are rolling.